Following passage comes from Luke 21, 20-36, the New Living Translation. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then you will know that the time of its destruction has arrived. Then those in Judea must flee to the hills, those in Jerusalem must depart, and those out in the country should not return to the city. For those will be the days of God's vengeance, and the prophetic words of the scriptures will be fulfilled. How terrible it will be for pregnant women and for nursing mothers in those days. For there will be disaster in the land and great anger against this people. They will be killed by the sword or sent away as captives to all the nations of the world. And Jerusalem will be trampled down by the Gentiles until the period of the Gentiles comes to an end. And there will be strange signs in the sun, the moon, and stars. And here on earth the nations will be in turmoil, perplexed by the roaring seas and strange tides. People will be terrified at what they see coming upon the earth, for the powers in the heavens will be shaken. Then everyone will see the Son of Man coming on a cloud with power and great glory. So when all these things begin to happen, stand tall and look up, for your salvation is near. Then he gave them this illustration. Notice the fig tree or any other tree when the leaves come out. You know without being told that summer is near. In the same way, when you see all these things taking place, you can know that the kingdom of God is near. I tell you the truth, this generation will not pass from the scene until all these things have taken place. Heaven and earth will disappear, but my words will never disappear. Watch out, don't let your hearts be dulled by carousing and drunkenness and by the worries of this life. Don't let the day catch you unaware like a trap, for that day will come upon everyone living on the earth. Keep alert at all times and pray that you might be strong enough to escape these coming horrors and stand before the Son of Man.
That is an lectionary reading appropriate for this Sunday. It is called different names. It is called Olivet Discourse of Jesus, or Small Apocalypse, because it has that apocalyptic flavor. It actually is, formally, literally, apocalypse. Or it's called Synoptic Apocalypse, because this one is in Gospel of Mark, in Gospel of Matthew, and in Gospel of Luke. There are slight differences between what is highlighted or what is being dropped from it, but the almost identical discourse or this teaching is present in all three synoptic Gospels. And in order for us, friends, to really understand and appreciate this text, we need to understand its genre, its literary style. Because texts like these have been used and abused, and you heard me saying that many times over. They're used and abused to the very opposite what it was originally intended to be or do. So in order for us to understand what is the literary setting here, we need to understand that this is definitely not the only apocalypse revelation. You know that there is a revelation of John, the last book of the New Testament of the Bible. But there are also Old Testament versions, like in the book of Daniel. And there are dozens and dozens of other non-canonical, non-in-the-Bible apocalypses. Usually they are associated with some ancient figure like Adam or Abraham or Enoch, who receives the special knowledge about what is transpiring and is going to transpire and is charged with bringing that message to people. Apocalypses were a very popular genre at the time of New Testament. Like an ancient version of our horror movies or zombie movies. I was thinking, what will be the closest parallel in these days. They are also, or both these genres, modern one and this ancient one, are eliciting fear and, frankly, disgust, evoking nightmares, revulsion, and terror of unknown and macabre. And both are strangely attractive. They pull us in. And, just describing it like this, it is already quite powerful tool of passing on message. Because the audience shares, is unified, is gathered around those shared powerful emotions of fear and what we are fearful of. And then the horror of zombie stories is further used to uncover specific shapes of our fears. So some are about wars, others about mental illness, of invasions, of violence, lawlessness, alienation, ignorance, fear of supernatural, unknown, or infections. All these are present there. Stories also model the coping mechanisms or solutions, like cooperation, heroism, unassuming savior who appears suddenly from the person you would never guess, mutual care, love, and of course, quite often, sacrifice, self-sacrifice. Often the horror story reaches, if not necessarily happy ending, then some kind of a resolution, closure, and some moral lesson, or at least a warning for the future. And with some license, we can say that apocalyptic stories, ancient apocalyptic stories, were ancient supernatural versions of these horror or zombie movies, naming and addressing disasters, naming and addressing tragedies, naming and addressing shared conflicts and fears, suggesting also coping strategies and bringing closures and moral lessons. All these are present there. And you don't need to believe in the real existence of zombies to appreciate a zombie movie. And in a similar way, you don't need to calculate the end of the world to appreciate and have benefit from the apocalyptic story. In fact, such beliefs in zombies or the end of the world could be detrimental for the understanding and appreciation of those stories, if not outright signs of some mental distress. Zombies and dire predictions of apocalyptic stories are just a scaffolding a tool to deliver the real message behind it. And so apocalypses don't predict future. They are classical example of vaticinium ex eventu, that means prophecy from what had happened. When they are being written, when they are being told, what they are presenting itself, predicting, had already happened. But using this medium, they help people to understand tragedies, disasters, and help them to cope with fear. So our little apocalypse was not predicting the fall of Jerusalem. We heard about the Jerusalem being surrounded by armies and so on, and destruction of the temple, not necessarily mentioned in Luke, but present in those other synoptical versions of this story. It was written after all that happened. And, here I am not any spectacularly brave or sharing with you anything extremely new. Already in the mid-19th century, a French Protestant theologian, Timothée Colani, coined this observation and coined the name for this passage, Little Apocalypse. And then, of course, theologians after that, many of them accepted this view. And I would not turn our worship into a Bible class, so I need to get myself under control. So, what are that encoded messages? That is the most important thing for us today. What are those messages which are being built up or kept up by this scaffolding of this story? Firstly, it is helping us to cope with the mega trauma of bloody, brutal war. Definitely at that time, that was the siege, capture, sacking of Jerusalem and destruction of the temple. You cannot imagine what it meant for people. It was destruction of the navel of their world, the center of their world. The temple was almost untouchable. That was the seat of God in minds of many, and even the Christians were not necessarily fully buying into this temple doctrine, but we know that the early church still came to temple to worship. So even Christians, early Christians, continued worshiping in the temple. And now the temple is gone. And it happened in such an utter brutality. And this story is helping people to cope with that. Because, just look, firstly, in this story we hear that the armies are blamed, not necessarily the people who absorbed it, who lived through it, who were afflicted by it. You might say, what is silly? Of course, armies. But you'll be surprised how often victims are blamed for what happens to them. Secondly, indignation is present there. Atrocities are named, and atrocities are not normalized. They are viewed as atrocities, and it is said that there will be time when they'll be gone. So they are not normalized. That's another problem when we are dealing with violence in our society, that over time, that violence had tendency to be normalized. We get used to it. And here, apocalyptic cry is saying, this is not normal. This is not normal. First of all, don't blame victims. This is not normal. And finally, it is helping here, definitely Christian community, to live without temple, helping to cope with that situation. Yet keeping some Jewish connections, because in that apocalyptic story, even in Luke, which is the most Hellenistic out of synoptical gospels, there is a literal quotation from Hebrew Bible, from Daniel, about Son of Man coming with clouds. That's a literal quotation. So temple is gone, but we are not losing completely our Jewish roots. We continue being faithful in that respect. Hebrew Bible is our Bible. Next, we hear about natural disasters and signs in the sky. It's difficult, maybe some paleoastronomer will able to tell us, what might be there, but those disasters and tidal waves, which are mentioned, or surges of sea, that might be associated with the disaster of Vesuvius, and will help us actually to date where it was written. But those might be some other earth-shaking, explosive experiences, not necessarily. But Vesuvius was definitely something quite well known. And if it was so, then there is something else here present, because Vesuvius happened on an Italian peninsula. And Roman society was severely hit by that. And there is, in this story, no blame game or any malice. Imagine, Romans just destroyed Jerusalem, took down temple. Shortly afterwards, there is this disaster in Italy, and it is mentioned, but they are not saying they are reaping their vengeance. No, it's not there. No blame game, nor malice. That's another interesting aspect of this. And then coming from that is almost preeminent pacifism, sympathy with all the afflicted. It is telling us it is all right to cry over the human disasters of wars or natural disasters. It is all right to cry with parents of Alan Kurdi for the malnourished Afghan or Yemeni children now. It is all right. And that is the beginning. That is the stepping stone of doing something about it. As we know, in our own experience. But first thing is naming it with sympathy, with understanding, without blame games or without malice. And then with that pacifism comes further with the imperial geopolitical conflicts. And yes, that is the Jewish war and the sacking of Jerusalem. That is what is the closest to our imperial geopolitical conflicts. It is all right not to take sides. If you notice that Apocalypse is not taking sides with Romans or with Jews, somehow in between the lines you can see more sympathy with those who were pummeled and destroyed and so on, but not taking sides. And not only that, running away from events like that and sharing this destiny and sympathy with refugees is all right. So we have here hardly any blame game, any malice or vindictiveness. They might be there slightly present. I acknowledge that. But they are kept on very short leash. They are tamed. And all of that is then closed with that beautiful and hopeful parable of the fig tree. After realism of catastrophes, there is this reassurance of the vegetative season. We would say in our translation, spring. For them, it was the beginning of summer. It was time for love. We know that because in Song of Songs are similar allusions to blooming vineyards and fig trees putting up leaves and figs. After that realism of catastrophes, this reassurance of spring. We all know about imperial wars, about Iraq, Afghanistan, genocide in Yemen or in Ethiopia, about environmental dangers, climate change, industry or military pollution, wildfires, hurricanes, earthquakes, droughts and floods. We all know about it. We still need to be shaken by it, but the ultimate goal and divine purpose, divine will for the world is not all of these disasters and catastrophes, but like a spring orchard, putting up leaves and future fruits. So, my answer to all the fundamentalists who want to scare people with apocalyptic stories, my answer would be the end of the world is not a fiery, bitter, vindictive hell. On the contrary, it is like a spring bloom. Imagine that in Middle East, semi-deserts, and then those leaves springing with their sharp green color like you have it on the bulletin cover or is on our slides for worship. And finally, last lines of that are exhortation to sobriety, perseverance, steadiness, civility, and kindness. For hope. God's future belongs not to brain-dead zombies, but to lush, bright spring of life. And that is that good message, hopeful message of this biblical apocalypse. And with that, I would like to encourage you Yes, we might be surrounded by disasters, rumors of wars. Today there was a powerful earthquake in Peru. And we still don't know what might be the results, but it was quite strong. And ecological disasters. This pandemic is not going anywhere, or at least it seems like that. But friends, that is not the destiny of us or of this world. We need to know about it, be realistic about it. With all of that, not blaming and so on, what I preached about. But keeping eyes in a hopeful message. With that, I want to leave you.